I could just... Nice job, high forward.
One shot, one kill. Ronnie did.
Now introducing your BudHole podcast, Scott, the Great Brandino, Gage's Rage, and Star Lamar.
What's up, girl?
I love the BudHole.
Who doesn't love the BudHole? Welcome to the official BudHole podcast. We are brought to you by the Blue Collar Media Group. We're super excited for tonight's episode as we bring the one, the only, Matt Waldman into the BudHole to chat NFL draft, which we've been covering very, very hard. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is going to be a fun first time here. Where are you guys based out of?
Minnesota.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, so we were actually, I was listening to Cape Fan one day when Paul Churchian had you on a Friday.
Oh, sweet.
And that's when we had Paul Churchian on our podcast a couple months ago, but that's when I was like, we need to get this dude on our show. He knows what he's talking about. We like to think we know what we're talking about. It could be fun.
Hey, I love it. And Paul's good people. And you know, Chris Spiel, I have been told that Spielman does get a copy occasionally of the RSP I've had someone tell me that he actually is someone that has it in his hands on a fairly regular basis. So it's nice to be able to touch base with Vikings fans.
Thank you for Daniil Hunter. No, thank you for Laquan Treadwell.
You're more likely. No, thank you for Laquan, and thank you for Justin Jefferson.
There you go.
There we go.
There you go.
Appreciate it.
And Alexander Madison. There we go.
Yeah,
he's sneaky good too. He's that nice little secondhand punch to Dalvin Cook, the guy that we need.
There you go.
So did you see that opening video there? Were you watching?
I did.
So what would you rate our quarterback Gage's Rage throwing through that bill right there?
I didn't hear you on that.
Oh, so
the throw? The throw?
The throw? Yeah, is that first round talent there? Or?
I'm telling you, it was pretty darn good. Were you doing it on the run? That's what I want to know. If you're doing it on the run, do you have pressure on you?
Yeah, he was.
We're not running unless someone's chasing us.
Hey, that's smart too. You get points. You get points for intelligence on that end, so that's good.
Getting into your rookie scouting profile, why don't you give the viewers kind of an overview, Matt, on the work that you put into it, and then also everything that you break down in it, really quick for the viewers.
Sure. The Rookie Scouting Portfolio is a 16-year-old publication. It comes out every year starting on April 1st, and then there's a post-draft addendum that comes with it. I base this on methods that I learned as an operations manager and director for a corporation for about 15 years, and I translated it to really how you evaluate football and use best practice methods to do that. And what I do is I have a couple of different ways in how I score players based on breadth of talent, all the things that a player can do at a position, and depth of talent, which is how well they do it. So, for example, a guy like Sterling Shepard of the New York Giants may have a wide breadth of talent. DK Metcalf may have a narrower breadth of talent, but his depth of talent is deeper. So you get a chance to see an idea of how these players work out. And I take everyone through my process, try to keep it in as an entertaining way as possible while teaching people about the ins and outs of football at these four positions that I study: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. This year's publication covers 150 players. It's over 1,058 pages long. I include a glossary of all the terms that I use in terms of the criteria that I study, so you understand the types of questions I'm asking, what the techniques are behind it, why I score it the way I do, how much I score it the way I do, and you get to see me breaking out the different skills at each position, so you can see how I rate players against each other with different types of accuracy, if they're quarterbacks, or their vision as running backs, or their contact balance, or how they block as tight ends or wide receivers, and the different types of release moves. And then I give you actual profiles of these players. I also track data. So I track after contact data for running backs. I also track throwing data for quarterbacks in terms of the range of where they're throwing, whether it's on script, off script, versus pressure, without pressure, or against zone coverage or against man-to-man coverage. And I track that for every quarterback that I study. And, that's just for the pre-draft publication. The post-draft is more fantasy-oriented, geared towards having cheat sheets and help you find kind of a sweet spot of where to draft players versus where my rankings may be. So if I liked Patrick Mahomes more than everybody, but I'm telling you, I'm not going to tell you to draft him first overall if I know you can get him, 20th, as opposed to getting him number one. So I've helped you find sweet spots for that. And you get a newsletter along with it from June through December. This is all available for $21.95, and 10% goes to an organization called Darkness to Light, which is an charitable organization devoted to preventing sexual abuse of children, as well as addressing it when it unfortunately happens, so that kids don't deal with extra trauma. It is Child Abuse Prevention Month, April, so it's a nice way to be able to get some good entertainment, as well as being able to help donate to a cause. We've already given $4,000 to Darkness to Light this year, and I've been giving to them since 2011 on an average of about $5,000 a year. So it's a great cause, and I have terrific readers who certainly are very supportive of what we do there, and that's the RSP in a nutshell.
Awesome. Did you have any history working with the NFL, or just have a passion for the NFL? Or
yeah, mine's a weird story because starting off in 2006, I didn't have any experience whatsoever. I was an operations manager. I did some writing as a journalist, doing some journalism, ranging from covering some football as well as doing a lot of various, very different work. But about 5-6 years into writing the RSP, as I continued to gain an even deeper level of knowledge of these positions, I started to get contacted by scouts. And so scouts would contact me and tell me they loved the process. I would ask them questions about things that I could improve upon. They would refer me to different books, different options in terms of what I could learn more about. And over time, the RSP has become one of the more popular independent draft guides that scouts use to cross-check their work. And that's according to Division I recruiters that I know at colleges who deal with these scouts on a daily or weekly basis when they come to visit, and they see what these guys bring with them in terms of reference materials, reading materials. And they say that, the RSP, Dane Brugler's draft guide, those are two of the ones that they see most frequently. And I have some scouts who certainly I stay in touch with who've done that, who've talked with me from that end. So I was just a hardcore football fan, Cleveland Browns fan growing up in the early to mid 70s when they were good, in the 80s when they were good. But yeah, I know. I appreciate that. And but that's the way it goes.
You got to be damn excited about that team right now, though. And then you got the talk that Clowney might be joining them.
I am excited about them. I was to be honest, I was hoping that when Baker Mayfield got drafted that I could get out. Like that was like my opportunity to say, "Ooh, I could be out of here at that point," because I wasn't a big fan of Mayfield. I saw more as like a Jeff Garcia type at his best. And Jeff Garcia had some Pro Bowls to him, but that's kind of where I think he is. But then they drafted Nick Chubb, who I actually thought was an amazing young player and one of my favorite players I've studied in quite a while. And I was like, they pulled me right back in the next round. So I can't believe.
I think you do. I know you do because I was reading it today. But you mentioned in your rookie guide today that I was looking.
I'm missing you. You went on mute.
We're back on?
Yeah. Muted for some reason, but we should be good to go now.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in your rookie scouting profile. You were talking about how Nick Chubb is one that you probably spent more time than most on because you were trying to figure out pre and post injury.
Yeah.
You didn't really notice after his injury kind of what the mainstream take was on Nick Chubb. You weren't really seeing that, and you weren't sure if it's because of your bias towards him because you liked him so much, or if it's because he was actually like back close to what he was pre-injury.
That's what I wanted to make sure that I wasn't biased, because for me, I think people knew I worked at the University of Georgia, and I worked there for 10 years. I was graduated from there. Now, most people would not know that I never actually went to a Georgia game. and that I was not a Georgia fan or a college fan really in general. But people knowing that association, I knew that if I had him rated above Saquon Barkley, even if it was just by a little bit, that people would probably think that that was a bias, after so many years of me doing this. So it was very important to me. And also it was kind of a complex thing after the injury that he had. He tore 3 ligaments in his knee. And I know some people, I work with people who certainly have a good understanding of the medicals. And, somebody, doctor told me, he's like, seriously, like, I don't know how he came back this quick. And he had a terrific surgery to be able to have 3 ligaments stitched up the way he did, because it's either usually too tight or too loose. And, so I wanted to be extra careful that if I was going to say there was a player on par with Saquon Barkley, if not a little bit better, that, I had to watch a lot in order to see every detail to compare that. Yeah.
And if you look at their career so far, Chubb's obviously had the better NFL career so far.
So far, and obviously injury hurts a little bit of that. But what you've seen with Barkley is he's an undeniably great talent. But at the same time, you have to understand that he also can have times where he's a little impatient, where he tries to bounce things outside and lean on his athletic ability a little more than Chubb did. Chubb's a little wiser of a runner. And that was the case when they were at school. And it's not like I hadn't encountered this before back earlier in earlier years, probably 10 years or 12 years before. I was trying to tell everybody I knew as a fan that they need to watch Adrian Peterson at Oklahoma. But at the same time, as much of a generational back as he was, I had Marshawn Lynch just slightly higher. And you would probably say Adrian Peterson was the better back. I would say so, but not by much. Marshawn Lynch pretty much showed what he's capable of. And for me, the final score isn't as important as what tier they're in. So if you score, one guy scores an 85 and the other one scores an 84.5, really, it's just about where they fit best, what kind of player you want more of in terms of what type of style of player you're looking for. And then there's all the other things that I don't look at, which are, deep dive into medicals, character background, personality fit with a team. These aren't things that I can't have access to. So I'm just looking strictly based on the field.
I was going to ask about that. So in the cases of like Joe Mixon or a Tyreek Hill, were they ranked higher than most other people had him because you didn't have the character concern in the ranking? Or
I don't really know where other people had them, but I would say that probably didn't matter as much to me, because it was more about if a team feels like they're going to be okay, then I'm okay with it. And the way I kind of approach it is this, I certainly have my own opinions about, whether, what type of chances people should get in society for mistakes that they make. And we all have our opinions about, the criminal justice system and the legal system and as well as the prison systems. And the way I look at it is that if our society allows, CEOs or vice presidents or heads of HR to be, still working their jobs, and they've done as the same things or worse and may have done it repeatedly, maybe what we need to be focused on more is not what happens to football players or what they get as much as we should be thinking about what we would want to see from our government and our system. And that's a whole other can of worms. So I just look at it as, if I'm an NFL team and we think that this was a guy that can grow past it and he's available to play due to the way our legal system is, and I don't even bother with it.
And there's obviously, you got to take into consideration that a lot of these guys coming into the draft, they're younger than 23. A lot of them could be 19 to 21. And, how many stupid things have you done out when you were younger too? Everybody's done that they regret. Obviously there's degrees and there's levels of things that people can do that should be taken into account, but going out to the bar and having too much fun one night, you grow out of that phase.
Yeah.
People do.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people do. And certainly, I worked in a 10,000 employee company, and I used to work with, I used to run a branch that had probably about 2,500 to 3,000 labor hours on it. And there are plenty of people I've hired who had things written by judges into their record about what happened and why, and what was when you look at their background, what has been stricken and what hasn't, and all that kind of thing. And most of those people that I did decide to pull the trigger on were great employees, because they made a mistake and they learned from it, and they had to mature faster, because there are a lot of people, as we know, who are out there who get away with a lot of stuff and never get in trouble. And then what ends up happening, if, either they grow out of it, or they're just further enabled to think that they can get away with things that they shouldn't get away with. And they haven't really even learned. They just look good.
Yep, precisely. Sticking with your tiering system on this year's rookie scouting profile, you coincidentally have, I believe it. Well, you do. You have Zach Wilson tiered one tier below the other 4 quarterbacks of the top 5. Can you kind of get into some of the things with Zach Wilson that you're not the biggest fan of?
Yeah, absolutely. Because to me, Zach Wilson is a player who really has one fit. He's a lot like Baker Mayfield in this respect. Outside, what the Vikings do, what the Browns do, what the Jets do. He's an outside zone, wide zone type of player who you can put him to half side of the field, let him throw with routes that have multiple windows breaking across the field, and he can be very good at that. Certainly, people love the back shoulder throw, and he does that very impressively. But you're not going to make a living on back shoulder throws. I mean, even Aaron Rodgers doesn't make a living on back shoulder throws as many as he throws. You've got to be able to threaten the entire field with accuracy. And when you look at Zach Wilson's play, with the games not only that I just watched, but the ones that I tracked specifically, you see inaccuracies in the intermediate and vertical ranges of the field. And these ranges to me are between 14 yards down the field from the throwing point to about 42 yards downfield. So the ultra deep throws, he's accurate. The short throws, he's accurate. The throws that actually put defenses in a bind and force them to have to adjust are the ones that he's not accurate on as much as he should be. And he gets away with some throws that he's trying to make because he thinks he has the arm to do it. And in the NFL, or at least in the college game, what I've noticed, he's had a number of throws that he's completed that in the NFL they wouldn't fly because the coverage was very tight and these defenders had an extra step on them. Usually what happens is he doesn't recognize that there's a defender squatting over the top to the opposite sideline. And a lot of these opposite sideline throws that he tries to make, he's not going to make in the NFL. And he also has throws where he tries to squeeze the ball into situations where there's defenders over the top and they're just nailing the wide receivers. And it's one thing to do it on a 4th and 7 with 157 left in a 3-point game, and you need to make that throw. And it's another to make these throws on a regular basis when it's the 4th quarter and you're up by 21 and there's no reason you even need to deliver that hospital ball to your receiver. So there's that. And then he has some issues with his front leg where his front leg locks out when he throws the ball. So it either sails when he's throwing short or it sinks when he's throwing deep. And so he's got to fix that in addition to these things. And, there's enough talent there that I'd say if you sat him for a year or two, maybe in a different system, he might develop if he can address some of these issues. But if you're trying to play him right away, the only system that I see that working with is the one that he's likely going to is with the Jets. So while if someone asked me as a Jets fan, what do you think of that pick? And I'd say, well, I think he'll work there if they get the talent around him to succeed. If someone said, is he the guy you'd want number 2 overall? And the answer would be, I wouldn't want him inside the 3rd round.
Let's get into the next team down the draft board, San Francisco. If you're the GM for the San Francisco 49ers, who would be the quarterback that you'd be targeting, assuming Lawrence goes 1 and Wilson goes 2?
Oh, without a doubt, Trey Lance. I'm a huge Trey Lance fan. I think that this guy I'm glad you guys like him too.
We're all NDSU alums.
Well,
so
he's a Minnesota boy.
Star's not, but Brandon and I are.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Gage's Rage, we were roommates there, and then Scott went up there too, and we went to the same school, high school. So it's we were there in the Carson Wentz era.
Yep,
I hear you. Well, that's a good place to begin because a lot of people will, I'm sure you've seen the criticisms that range from, well, Carson Wentz didn't have lasting success in the NFL, and it's the lower profile school in terms of top competition that they face, and his production wasn't all that great in terms of yardage. And so those are all interesting kind of narratives that people put out there, but I don't agree with any of them. And the reasons being is that Wentz had his own set of issues. I mean, when you evaluate him, he was a tough kid. He certainly could move around the pocket well, but he didn't have the great tight space maneuverability with his footwork. I mean, it's why the Eagles basically abandoned him taking deeper drops and just using him in the pistol, because he could set up fast and deliver the ball fast with accuracy within about 25, 30 yards. And then he was great at being able to buy time and throw the ball behind people. But his deep accuracy in terms of pinpoint throws, against, in stride, in a timing game, were always hit and miss. That was always an issue with him. You could never, he was either too deep or too short, too wide, too far. He could never get that under control. So the quick game was where it was at for him. And when that offensive line broke down, things broke down with him, because he never really addressed the footwork issues that set up his entire game in terms of timing, moving efficiently in the pocket, and throwing accurately. Trey Lance has none of those problems. He has great feet. He has terrific drop game, 3, 5, 7-step drops, awesome play action game. I think his placement has moments of just elite play. I mean, he can be surgical in that regard. Sometimes he tries to get a little too surgical, and he'll try and squeeze a ball in where there's a safety or a linebacker that he shouldn't, but it's nothing insanely bad with his game. And he has just a sweet over-the-top motion. And the fact that what people don't understand about the yardage part, and I'm sure you guys do as fans and going to the school, is that system, which is a pro system, and he has the reads and checks of a pro, he's also demanded of him to go short to deep in terms of reading the field. And most people don't understand that. They think all quarterbacks go deep to short. So if he's have such little yardage, then they think he's like a captain checkdown player who, who's just not going for those deep shots, when in fact, it's actually the reverse. Because if he's making so many of those short to deep throws that when he actually throws deep and he's accurate, you're looking at a guy who's making it his second, third, and fourth read, or he's making it his first read. He read something early in the play, pre-snap or post-snap, to go to that right away. So what you're saying is, really what's happening is that you're talking about a player who has an aggressive mindset and better recognition than people are giving him credit for. And so I think he could easily be the best player in this, the best quarterback in this class. And I'm a fan of Trevor Lawrence. I think Trevor Lawrence is an excellent player. But I think Lance, if he gets, the only thing that I would be down on him about, I mean, yeah, sometimes he has some inaccuracies where he also has a motion. It's a lot like Donovan McNabb, where the ball can kind of drop a little bit, where he kind of the point of the ball is kind of coming down. But the player he reminds me of is my favorite player of all time, which is Steve McNair. Tough, very good passer, someone who's underrated in terms of what they could do as a thrower. And if he gets half a year even to sit on the bench, where he gets a chance just to see a wider variety of defensive looks and then play through some of that over the next year and a half, I think he can survive that first part of being a NFL quarterback and develop into a very good player who reminds me a mix of McNair and the best of what we see from Matthew Stafford when Matthew Stafford plays well.
So we've kind of danced around it a little bit, but obviously the talents of the players are important, but where do you rank where they're landing? Because you mentioned it with Zach Wilson and the Jets being a good fit, and Trey Lance going to a place where he can sit for a little bit under a good system and learn. How important is that to you, where players land and how they actually develop and reach their full potential in the NFL?
Well, post-draft, it's everything. Pre-draft, you just don't know, and all you can do is kind of take guesses and recommend what you would see if you had the privilege to be in that position. So, back in the day, I for instance, I have a guy like David Johnson ranked 9th among running backs, but I said if he went to a gap system like Indianapolis or Arizona, within a year or two, he could be the most productive running back in this class. So you kind of have to gauge that, and sometimes you hit, sometimes you don't. But with quarterback, it's so important that you have a good scheme fit and you have you have a semi-patient ownership. And the problem with that is that few teams are that way. And it's not because of the scouts. It's probably not usually because of the coaches or maybe even the GM, but often it's because of the owner. Yeah. The owners are like, just think about it like this. I used to work at a company where, we knew we were going through cuts, and still the owners walking around the corporate office after they didn't give bonuses to all their employees, walking around showing them pictures of the yacht that he just bought. Like, he may be smart in certain things, but this is not one of those things that, it's that same mentality in the NFL where you get guys who they listen to the wrong things. I mean, like, I remember this, there's a few stories. I remember when Vince Young was drafted by the Titans, Jeff Fisher wanted Jay Cutler and the scouts wanted Jay Cutler. Norm Chow, who they brought in to be their offensive coordinator, of course, wanted Matt Leinart, who was the quarterback there at USC. But, the former owner there, I think it was Bud Adams at that time, who, when he got forced out of Houston, he just wanted to shoot the bird at the whole city and say, let's get Vince Young, a Houston product, and bring him in here. And they didn't know what they were going to do until literally days before the draft. And I had asked somebody I knew close to this, because I remember ESPN at the time, though, years ago when I was still watching a lot of it, was that they were talking about how undecided everyone was. And then in post draft, they talked about how Mike Shanahan called Jeff Fisher and asked him, what do you think about Jay Cutler? And Jeff Fisher said, I wanted him. I would have taken him in the early first round if I could get him. That's how I feel about him. And Shanahan, they traded up to get him. And I know the story from that one too, because the former GM, I was on his show recently in recent years, and he told the story too about how Mike Shanahan wanted Matt Leinart. But they all agreed as a team that if Leinart was taken, that they would go for Jay Cutler. And Jay played well early on, but then when Shanahan left, Josh McDaniels came in, and the first day that McDaniels had a meeting with anybody, he met with the quarterback's agent, and the GM, and proceeded on a phone call to rip Jay Cutler relentlessly, just curse him out, just read him the riot act about his play and how bad he was and how much better he needed to get. And they knew that Jay Cutler had more development in him, but this was what Josh McDaniels thought was like motivational. And Jay Cutler, at the end of that conversation with the GM in the room, and they hung up, and McDaniels went about doing whatever he was doing, probably trying to imitate Vince Lombardi one more time in terms of whatever that was. He turned and looked at his agent. He said, "Get me out of here. I don't want to play here. Trade me. I'm not playing for this guy." And that's what they ended up doing. And Chicago thought they were getting a finished product. So the whole moral of the story is that owners and certain people high up, oftentimes they listen too much to things rather than to their own staff. Alex Smith was a great example of that too, where, I know some scouts where, they all graded him as a 4th round prospect. And then the ownership was so impressed with what Gil Brandt was reporting in this pro day, and it was the best pro day ever saw since Troy Aikman, that they felt like that was more urgent information than whatever the scouts did. And then they charged their GM with going down to the scouts room and basically giving a hit tape of 20 highlight plays and saying, I want you to regrade what you've done with this hit clip. And a couple of the scouts almost got into a fight with the GM. I mean, like, literally had to be separated from him, because they're like, we've scouted this guy for 3 years and you want us to use a hit clip? I'm not doing that. Like, just so you can cover your assets, for making this decision, do that yourself. I'm not going to put my name on a scouting report that's like a hack job. And that's the kind of stuff that's like same internal office politics you see everywhere. And oftentimes the guy at the top can be overly reactionary, not trust his people, and overrule things in a way where it's fine when they overrule when it's a tight decision and you don't know which way to go. But when your people that you've paid money to do all that work say, we feel really good about this, and you're like, yeah, but that car dealer who who basically can help me sell a ton of season tickets, when we're in the steam room after at the health club that we're at, talking about this, and he says he saw some Louis Riddick say something on ESPN, I better listen to that.
That's kind of what it sounds like Dallas is doing with Kyle Pitts right now. Jerry Jones is falling in love with Pitts, and Pitts is a very nice player, don't get me wrong, but I don't think the scouts would have Pitts as their top guy that they should be drafting.
I mean, yeah, it just depends on how they view it, but I would think with the 3 receivers that they've had, there are some other priorities for that team for sure. And yeah, it's just, I don't mind building on a strength rather than showing up on a weakness, but their offense is strong enough at the skill positions. And
right.
And there's a point where you kind of need to fix that offensive line and get everybody healthy in order to help that offense be what it is.
Right, to help maximize your talent.
A little bit about Pitts off air. How do you feel about Pitts? Because you said you do tight ends. Do you ever rank them in like the top 5 picks, potentially 4? They have them going to Atlanta. I just think it's insanely high for a tight end to go.
Yeah, I think I have not done that yet. And I was a huge TJ Hawkinson fan, but TJ Hawkinson was a tight end.
Yeah.
Kyle Pitts, he can be a tight end. I don't think he's the blocker Hawkinson was coming out or OJ Howard was, but he has some skills in that regard that we could get into. But the real answer to that question is he's a pass catcher, and they're either going to use him like Jimmy Graham and move him around, and he can be more lethal than Jimmy Graham because he's a more fluid player and because he can actually block. I watched Jimmy Graham once at the Senior Bowl learn how to try and practice hitting one of those dummies that go back up, the body size one. Yep. And there was, he tried to hit that thing, the right technique. He could barely move the thing. It like weeble wobble just a little bit, where somebody else, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was Bird, the USC tight end at the time. He was showing him Dominique Byrd. Yeah. And he flicks his hands and that thing hits the ground and comes right back up. And then you see Jimmy Graham try and do it. And it's just like, it literally just does this. And it's like, he had a long way to go that way. That wasn't his game. But Pitts is way better than that. But he could have easily been my number 3 receiver in this class, just based on the way he runs routes, his athletic profile, and the way he catches the ball. So in that regard, he's a little bit more of an outlier because you can classify him at 1 of 2 positions.
And if you were a coach or a GM too of a team, you draft Kyle Pitts, what would you recommend for trying to put weight on his frame? Would you say 10 to 15 pounds?
I would honestly, if I were drafting Kyle Pitts, I'd have a plan for him as what he is right now.
Okay.
And if anything else happens, it's a bonus, but he'd be like my Irv Smith plus, in that regard, because I can move him outside in a way that maybe with Irv, I wouldn't be able to do as often.
Okay.
Do you look at difficulty of opponents when you do your rankings, or just kind of technique? And
it's a great question, and I love answering this question because it kind of gets to the meat of what I do with the publication. I do not look at difficulty of opponents because what I find is that if you ask the right questions and you weight how your evaluation works, you weigh things the right way, you're going to be able to find really good information about these players, whether they're playing behind a great surrounding talent and putting up tons of yardage against inferior teams, or if they're the lone great player on their team and their production is horrible against a team that vastly overmatches them. So, for example, when I ask, for me, like running backs, when I ask the right questions about these players, what I'm trying to do is isolate what the player can do. And the best way I put it is asking questions so that you can determine whether the player is making decisions and performing techniques that put him in a position to make positive plays. It's not whether he made a positive play or a negative play, but whether he did the things to get him in position to do so. So that means he either didn't get help or he got help in the ways that your team's supposed to. So, for instance, Matt Forte. I had a high grade on Matt Forte because, and one of the highest scores I gave him was after when he was at Tulane, and there was one player on the Tulane offensive line who could actually bench press as much as any of the players at LSU. That was the only player on Tulane who could do that. There was no other player on Tulane who could outbench press anyone on LSU, anyone on the team. I was literally listening to the broadcast when they were talking about this. And this was the year that Dorsey was there, and they had that monster defense. They won the national championship. Matt Forte averaged 1.9 yards per carry in that game, and he graded out, I think, as my third highest back in the draft, and that was one of the highest scores I gave him. Same with Ahmad Bradshaw when he was facing a Tennessee defense that was a top-ranked defense. So, yeah, I mean, to me, it's not so much about competition, but what you can do with what you can do to put yourself in positive situations, and it tends to bear out because I've also seen guys who've had absolutely awful scores, but they're considered really, really productive players in the college game, and people love them. Bishop Sankey was a good example of a player that was highly productive, but at the end of the day, I didn't have high scores for him, or Darren McFadden. And so when you evaluate, to me, it's not so much about the talent, but what the player can do themselves.
Solid.
We had technical difficulties. Our camera battery was running a little bit low earlier, and it died on us. So now Star Lamar is not in the picture here, but sometimes he likes it that way.
He's not much.
He's here in spirit.
In spirit, he's here. Let's really quick on your running backs. You have Trey Sermon as your top. He's tiered in the same tier as Najee Harris. I believe Etienne's tier 2. Whatever. You have Trey Sermon in that tier 1 with the other big dog running backs. What goes into Trey Sermon's game that you love so much?
Yeah, and it's definitely an outlier. But the thing is that when you watch his game, he has a great connection between his eyes and his feet. And that's very important with running backs, is that they need to be able to react to the speed of instinct with a variety of techniques with their footwork and how to use their hips to change direction. And it's not about dynamic movement. You know, there's only a few backs who get away with Adrian Peterson-like jump cuts that he's still performing at his ripe old age of it for an NFL player. But most of the time, you can't live and die by those because you're jumping too close to the line. You're taking too much time and space to change direction. And you see a lot of players who are seen as great athletes and high-end prospects fail in that regard until they figure out that it's about efficient footwork where you can just open your hips, point the toe, flip your hips, get outside with a minimal number of steps. That allows you to press tighter to the line so that you can then influence defenders on blockers so that you can make a cutback or a bounce out or set up the block that's directly in front of you. And so a lot of that also goes into changing pace or varying the stride length of your approach to the line of scrimmage. This is very important as a zone runner. It also has its importance with gap running. Sermon can run both zone and gap. He has great footwork in that regard. He's very efficient, but he also can make the dynamic moves. And he has what Dalvin Cook has. And one of the things that Dalvin Cook has that's fairly unique in the league right now is what's called curvilinear movement. And there's a guy by the name of Sean Miska who worked with Everson Griffith back in the day when Griffith was an excellent player for the Vikings. He's a movement specialist, and he coined that term. And it's something that I've learned from him about, is that think of it as like a racing motorcycle making a hairpin turn around a corner. It doesn't lose much of its speed when it does that. Well, Dalvin Cook, a lot of people got Dalvin Cook wrong because, especially the analytics crowd in the media, because they saw his performances in performance metrics in the combine and his workouts and thought he's not explosive enough. And what they failed to see was that they try to match 1-to-1 what they think applies to a player. So when they match vertical leap or broad jump or 3-cone drill, they expect, well, it's about how fast they make cuts or how they change direction and what they do. And they don't think about the fact that maybe the metrics don't match what the player does on the field and what their style is. And Dalvin Cook has that style where he could bend around players. You rarely see him make hard cuts. He's actually, when he changes direction, you actually see his feet do this and kind of turn when he's doing, especially in the open field. And he's got great balance. He's got good, obviously, speed and acceleration, but it's that ability to bend around people in curvilinear movement. And that's something that Trey Sermon has. And he has the size, he has the size to be a good back. And the reason that people are down on him is that it's not so much they're down on him. They're just lukewarm because he didn't have the storied production in his career. He was at Oklahoma. Oklahoma always has a number of good backs, just like Georgia or Alabama or, a lot of Ohio State at sometimes often did too. And he played well there. But he had a little bit of injury, and then they brought in a couple other guys. And at this day and age in college football, we know if you have an opportunity to go to a national championship contender like Ohio State because they need a running back, well, you go. So that's what he did. And he ended up playing great there when Master T got hurt, looked fantastic. But teams draft players in the first round, not just based on talent, but based on how they cover their assets. It's a risk management game. They go, okay, is he tall enough? Is he heavy enough? Does he have the production from a big school? Has he stayed healthy? Does he have all the metrics we're looking for? Well, the metrics are very good for Trey Sermon, except for his long speed, which is the least important thing when it comes to the metrics for a good running back. You want great initial burst and acceleration and great short area change of direction. He has that. He has the great feet and the vision, all of those skills. So, but the thing is that teams have always been this way because they know, like, for instance, when I first started doing this, one of the reasons I first started doing this, I remember getting this idea because Gil Brandt was on NFL.com and he was doing a mock draft around this time, 17, 18 years ago when I started thinking about doing this. And he said, and I don't remember how long exactly it was, but I remember him saying, there's this running back in the draft. If he were 2 inches taller and 10 to 15 pounds heavier, he'd be a top 5 overall pick. Well, that player, the reason he wasn't is that, he was 5'9", 205. He played at Villanova. He was supposed to go to FSU, but tore his ACL playing a basketball game in high school, and they rescinded the scholarship. Otherwise, he would have been there. Then during his collegiate career, he slipped on some black ice, not even on the field anywhere, not practice, just in public, tore the other ACL, but still proceeded to lead the NCAA in total yardage as a return man, a receiver, and a runner. And that was Brian Westbrook, who had a heck of a career. But you knew that the Philadelphia Eagles and no other team, even though he tore up the Senior Bowl and impressed Andy Reid, owners know, like from a PR perspective, same with GMs, what if I draft a 5'9", 205-pound running back with 2 ACL tears who went to Villanova and he fails? I'm going to look dumber than I did if I drafted the FSU back who's 230 or 225, has like led the league and had these great metrics, but needs a compass to find the hole. I'm still going to look better drafting the FSU guy because at least everything on paper fits the resume bullet points. And with Trey Sermon, there's too many holes in his bullet points that people want to take him in the first round or maybe even the second.
So Trey Sermon's story is yet to be written, but you have him in tier 1. Is there any players that you've had in the past that have been I told you so players? That
sure.
Majority of people didn't have as high as you?
Russell Wilson, Matt Forte, Pat Mahomes. He was my highest scored guy at quarterback for many years. Nick Chubb is a perfect example of that. Cooper Kupp was a guy that I had rated fairly high. And those are guys that right off the bat, I was higher on Aaron Hernandez and Travis Kelce than most in terms of those guys. So I've had plenty. And at the same time, I've had my misses. I thought Hakeem Butler was a fantastic young prospect. He hasn't done anything. He got
cut, didn't he?
Yeah, he got cut, and they're trying him out at tight end at that point. So he's a good example of a player that sometimes you go for that and it doesn't work out. But absolutely, and with running back, I've tend to have a pretty good track record. So for me, when I look at him as a player, he just fits in there with Najee Harris and Javonte Williams, who are, I think the 3 top backs. But knowing that you can get, if you're a fantasy player, you can get him at a bargain, and knowing that you don't have to draft him as your first back overall.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And do you look at any other positions besides skill positions on offense? Are you ever looking at offensive line or defensive side of the ball at all?
No, I specialize in them. Like I used to do the Ross Tucker show every week, and I would look at offensive and defensive prospects for the year. But really, I just focus on those 4. I find that I don't want to spread myself too thin, and I'd rather deliver the most in-depth thing you can find on those 4 positions rather than be kind of half-assed on a number. And I'm not saying other people are. I just know I would be.
Right. This allows you to really deep dive those 4 specific positions.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask give us one guy you think is going to be overdrafted, probably your most overdrafted, you would assume, seeing what the mock drafts look like. And then also give us one guy that you think is going to be underdrafted that
Sure.
you're into.
Well, Zach Wilson was one, but we're not going to go. We'll leave that one alone. I think he's going to get overdrafted. But I also think that Kenneth Gainwell is going to get overdrafted. I look at this guy and I can understand how he could be a future Tiki Barber or Alvin Kamara in terms of function, and he has that he's a smart player with some all around skill sets, but he doesn't have the burst. And, and that's problematic for a 195-pound player who only gained 4 pounds while he was out of school, so he's still kind of a slow grower here. And you'd like to see him add some quick twitch muscle. I fear he could be more Ronnie Hillman than the next Tiki Barber or next Alvin Kamara. And so I'm a little suspect on him, even though I like the skills. The athletic traits, for once, are something that I'm worried about. Tamorrion Terry, I'll give you as another example of that. He also lacks the burst. He has great long speed, tracks the ball well, physical, but he could never win against top cornerbacks who pressed him because he didn't have the burst to get on top of them in the first place. And when you need a long runway as a receiver, that's a death knell for you. Underrated guys that I think will, I think Rashad Bateman is a guy that's getting he's getting more love now, but you guys know he had COVID. You guys know that, that he lost a good bit of weight and that he was a much different player. And the system was a little different at Minnesota. I mean, like they weren't horizontally stretching him in 2019 as much as they were in 2020. And he was an absolute monster in 2019. I think this guy's vastly underrated, is going to be a lot better than people expect.
And the thing too, sorry, Brandon, but the thing too with Rashad Bateman is you got to remember he had Tyler Johnson, who was actually their 1A for 2019. Anytime it was a 3rd and 5, 3rd and 4, Tyler Johnson was the guy that they went to. Bateman was more so the change of pace wide receiver, and he was very good. But physically, Bateman checks all the boxes over Tyler Johnson, even physically.
Oh, without a doubt. And I love the skills that he had to get off press man. He has some issues with his stance his stance is kind of wonky, and that minimizes the impact of his ability to win against press coverage. But he's a very smart player. I noticed that he is also very aware at the latest point before he gets the ball. He makes adjustments that you don't see a lot of players do, even in the pro game. Wide catch radius. Love his ability to work off of press coverage when I've seen him do it. And he has that running ability too, and he can play inside and outside. I think that versatility gives you a little bit of what you see in Keenan Allen, but with a little more explosion to his game. He's not quite Cordero Patterson in terms of being a runner, but he has a little bit of that contact balance in him to be that type of guy. And Cordero, while he was slow to be able to pick up a system, he was, and be a receiver on an every week basis without being coached exactly of here's the 3 things we're going to ask you to do this week, because that was really what kind of player he was. But man, as a ball carrier, he was one of the best open field ball carriers I've ever seen, outside of a running back position.
Right.
And so he obviously shined at his pro day. He ran, what was it, a 4.38 is what
Rashad Bateman?
Yeah.
Yep.
Clocked him in at. And obviously everybody is running, it seems like, faster 40s this year than they are on average every other year.
Yeah.
I factor, not having the combine in, having players that have opted out this year and not playing, how does that play a role into what you're looking at? Do you take that into consideration at all?
It's a tough thing because this is the toughest part about scouting players this year is that there is no centralized setting or control setting because some places have the grass shaved a little lower. Maybe their surfaces are a little more elastic, when it's an opportunity to jump or cut or drop the weight and all that kind of stuff. And then, all the little gamesmanship things that happen too with these teams that want to be able to recruit well. So that's difficult in itself, but all I can really do is I use the time. I try and reconcile it with the tape. And at that point, it's like if a player looks faster than his tape, then I can comment that he plays faster than his tape, and I can and usually know why. I can talk about the techniques that he mastered because, for instance, with wide receivers, there's a great YouTube clip, and I can't reference exactly what it was, but it's showing a coach saying, a coach basically looking at the situation and looking at two receivers, and one was a 4-3 guy and the other was a 4-7 guy, and had them run the exact same routes. And the 4-7 guy didn't run good routes. He didn't know how to drop his weight. He wasn't maximizing the speed of the breaks that he could actually run if he knew the technique and had mastered it. And he ran the break a lot slower than the 4-7 guy who had mastered it. The 4-7 guy looked much faster than the 4-4 guy. So there are things like that you can take into account and see. And there are players that maybe not maximizing their speed. And if that's the case, and I may give them a little bonus for their potential with their speed, but I don't give them the full credit. Whereas with guys who are maybe a little slower than I thought, at that point, usually I put them in the lower tier if there's a clear technique issue and maybe give them a bonus if there's a clear-cut opportunity to improve these skills. And if they're hard skills, then I may not give them any bonus at all because track record has shown that it's hard to learn those things.
So thinking back, you've been doing this for 16 years, I believe you said.
Yeah.
The 2017 running back class, 2014 wide receiver class came to mind. Has there been any position groups in specific classes that were especially fun or especially difficult to rank?
Yeah, this was a difficult one. So it was for wide receiver. Same with the past two classes. This class in particular, I think I told a friend of mine that if I wind up in jail for assault and battery, it's because I walked by someone and they looked like a wide receiver, and I just wanted to punch them out because ranking them is difficult, and there's so many of them. But this was a very deep class, 29 players. I gave grades that, within a year or two, you could see there's 29 players who have the ability on the field to be at least contributors, if not starters, one day. And obviously with attrition of injuries, knuckleheadedness, immaturity, not knowing how to work, that may slim down that there's the real number maybe 7. You just divide. I joke it's my scientific attrition factor of dividing it by 4. But that's kind of what I do, and it tends to work out that way. Running back, that class with Christian McCaffrey, Aaron Jones, Leonard Fournette, Dalvin Cook, that turned out to be, that was a fun class. The class that didn't work out with Chubb, Barkley, Darius Geist, Sony Michel, all those guys.
Ronald Jones, I think, was in that one.
Yes, Ronald Jones, the kid out of Northwestern, I particularly liked as well. Justin Jackson. That was a fun class as well. So, but to me, it's it's kind of weird because I just kind of look forward to the next one a lot, and I guess I'll look back and say, oh yeah, that was a great class. But at the time, I'm so immersed in the players that even like this tight end class, which many people in fantasy football see it as a dud beyond Pitts, I'm still, when you do this, you're looking at guys and you're like, this guy could be good. That guy might not be bad. This Pro Wells kid from TCU who, maybe only does 2 or 3 things really well. Still, I could see how he has a path here. You've got to project that. And with my gig anyway. The tough part about my gig is that, after you've watched a player and athletically there's no way in hell that he's making the NFL, you still got to watch another 4 or 5 games of him, and really be thorough to make sure that you're not missing anything and to understand what he can and can't do, because maybe he fits somewhere else, maybe for the Canadian League, maybe for an alternative league. So there's those things. And because when you're doing that so often, that when you do see players who have a chance, you have a more positive outlook and you're immersed about those guys. You're immersed in those guys because there's possibility there. Even if you don't think everyone's going to make it, you're still more intrigued than maybe the average fan is.
And where do you go to find the film? Do you get kind of insight stuff, film from college? Because I don't think they have a all 22 that's available to the public, at least that I've found. Because I know I've been looking at the defensive side of the ball here this last week, and I'm trying to look at actual game film of just, Davion Nixon against X, Y, or Z team, and all I'm getting is highlights or maybe just one game. And obviously you can't look at highlights to really rank a guy because they're only going to be showing the good things about him and not the things that they're lacking. Do you have a spot?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is right now I have an arrangement that I can't talk about, but I do have all 22 film and I have access to pretty much everything I need, which I'm very thankful for. So I can access that. Now, at the same time, I spent many years not accessing it on as consistent of a basis as I do now. And I still look at YouTube cut-up clips. There's a lot of great people who do a lot of great cut-ups for skill players. And I tend to like those still, even though I'll watch the all 22, because one of the failings of all 22 is that the angles they provide, you don't get the close-ups on releasing against press coverage. You don't get the close-ups on the footwork. You don't get the close-ups with certain types of where the quarterback's looking, what the details are of the finer details of certain aspects of their game with their release and their footwork. Sometimes you'll see it, but you won't always get that in the way that the broadcast can hyper focus on it. And to be able to see that on occasion can be as valuable, if not more valuable. So I try to use those views as a supplement to the all 22. But yeah, unfortunately, I had a colleague recently who was like, "Can you give me access to anything?" I'm like, "I can't because I would risk losing it all." But it's that's something that I unfortunately was able to get that arrangement in recent years.
And in the RSP, you do as well have YouTube links to certain players and games that you've watched. So if you buy the RSP, you do get access to some of that on those players.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we obviously want to be respectful of your time. We're coming up here to about an hour here. So we do appreciate you coming on and talking so much about what you're doing. And I mean, check out the RSP. Where can they find it?
At Matt Waldman, RSP.com.
It's a fantasy football. It's just a football in general nerd's wet dream. It's awesome. I was overwhelmed looking at it at first, but it's awesome.
Yeah, and it's bookmarked, so it's easy to find everything as long as you download it to like your hard drive. Don't try and open it on your phone or on just in your browser, or else you'll think, "What the hell am I doing?" Yeah.
Sometimes when I'm reading through yours, I'm thinking, "What the hell am I doing anyways?" Because you come up with the analytics, and I'm like, "What is all this? I like it, but I don't know what it is."
It's. I mean, again, it's a labor of love. It's something that I do. I'm fortunate enough to be able to make a living doing this now. But it's insanity. I remember describing, thinking up of this, and it wasn't as vast as it has become. But I remember describing this to some coworkers, and I could see the look on their face that they thought I had absolutely lost my mind.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you again, Matt, for coming on. Everybody, check him out on Twitter at Matt Waldman. Go to the website, download the RSP, and Matt, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Is it over?
Check out our website, www.officialbudhole.com. We're on all socials at officialbudhole.
Go jerk off.
Please leave us a rating and review on Apple Music, and we'll see you next time.
We're always so nervous when we have somebody on.
I don't want to embarrass us. I don't want him to think I'm telling him to go jerk off.
But what if he's interested? Who knows?
What if he said, don't mind if I do?
You don't want him to prevent cancer?
It might be like I'm saying, go fuck yourself.
That's fair. That's fair. The new slang for it.
All right. Bye.